Okay, so I want to tell you more about who I am and what my beekeeping story is. So I was an entomology major in college. I knew I loved insects, and when I was finally ready to admit that to 18-year-old friends, I took that up as my major at the University of Delaware. And I was lucky enough to have a professor, Dewey Caron. I don't know if you've heard him. He's written, beginning beekeeping books and things like that. And he offered a class called apidology. And so it was a whole entire 3-credit course in lecture, and then we had a 3-hour lab on Friday afternoons where we went out to the apiary. And it was like my favorite thing ever. The lab, like going out there and being with the bees. And our test was, go through this colony and tell me how it's doing and tell me what you see. So it was really exciting. And I couldn't believe there was a whole entire course on an organism other than humans. Right? Of course, we're the most studied organism on the earth, and honeybees are a close second. After I graduated, I was kind of burned out from school and followed my husband, who's an ornithologist. So can you understand how we're introduced in scientific circles as studying the birds and the bees? Yeah, it's really funny. And my name's Robyn, and he's an ornithologist, and it's all just ridiculous. But he was going to study brood parasitism in birds. So I don't know if you know anything about that, but there's this bird, the brown-headed cowbird, and they never build their own nest. They literally lay their eggs in over 200 different species nests. They'll just lay an egg and leave, and those are the foster parents for that bird. So I followed him there, and when I got there, I couldn't find a job or do anything that I felt was useful except for waitressing, which was horrible. And then I found there was positions in entomology to do a master's or PhD studying honeybees. And I was like, honeybees? Yeah, absolutely. So I went back to school too. I ended up getting my PhD there, studying the use of formic acid in indoor wintering facilities. So in Manitoba, about half of the bees are kept indoors in these overwintering buildings with airflow. The biggest problem there is too much heat and too much carbon dioxide. So there's like this whole airflow system. So my PhD was seeing, could you treat hundreds of colonies all at once by just putting formic acid into the system, right? And the way we kept bees there was extremely conventional. So this was, I'll age myself, I was there from 98 to 05, and everything we did was totally conventional. And I hadn't managed my own hives before, so we would prophylactically put the antibiotics and the powdered sugar on the sides of the bars every spring. All the feed had Fumidil in it. We would treat with Apistan back when that worked for mites, and Coumaphos then when that wasn't working. And I just did what I was told. Okay, the bees need this now. Okay, I'll go out to all of them and do that. And while my research was in winter, I still needed money, so I worked in the summer managing the colonies in the summer. So that was kind of my introduction to managing a whole bunch of colonies. Just do these things on a schedule and put in these pesticides, and we didn't really think much of it. And then in 2005, my husband got a job back here in Pennsylvania where I was born. So I'm from, I guess we're not in Pennsylvania right now, are we? I grew up near Reading, Pennsylvania, and I still live within half an hour of there. So it's kind of a miracle that either one of us even got a job near there, because funny enough, when you get a PhD, you have fewer job options because you're very specialized and whatever. So my husband teaches at Kutztown University. I taught there a little while before I transitioned into this new project where I'm, comparing the different management systems. But when I got here, it was time to kind of have my own bees or do some of my own research that I came up with all by myself instead of what my supervisor told me was the right thing to do. And I happen to live near the Rodale Institute. Have you heard of it? It's it's world famous for organic stuff. And a lot of the studies they do are on cropping systems and things, but they do conventional versus organic side by side. And it's a comparison because, they're trying to show all the differences between the two systems. And so I went there and talked to them about their bees. They have a pretty interesting, or had this system there where, they're a big name and bigwig stores like Whole Foods and things want their name associated with Rodale, so they would like sponsor the hives. So they, you know, they pay like $1,000 a year to have this set of 6 hives that were managed by Rodale. It may have been $1,000 each. I don't even remember, but it was a sweet deal. And so Rodale had bees.
How do I get that job?
Right, exactly. You just need to talk to Whole Foods, I guess. But they had all top bar hives. And I don't know if any of you are from Pennsylvania or New York, but these don't overwinter well. So they would die every year, and then they would, you know, have to replace them and everything. And they just had a new guy, Mike Schmaling, who just was starting to learn about bees. So we kind of learned together. And so what do you do when you're trying to learn something new? You Google it, right? I was like, I need to learn about this organic beekeeping thing. And so what came up? Solomon Parker, Michael Bush, all these people with these websites and all of this information about treatment-free and things like that. And so what I saw there was tons of information, but to be honest, I didn't feel like there was a lot of scientific backing, right? Like at Rodale, the guy in charge thought that it was really bad for the bees to use smoke. I was like, yeah, but I really need to use smoke. Like, because, so it's a toss-up. Is the smoke going to hurt them? I mean, this has been done for a really long time, and everyone I know does this. I've never seen any side effects. And if I don't use smoke, they're going to sting me and die, and I'm going to be swearing. And so it was like things like that. Like, where did you get that information that smoke is hurting the bees? So I tried to find scientific literature, couldn't find anything. And there's a whole bunch of things that I saw online. Like, for example, Michael Bush said that bees build comb faster when you don't give them foundation versus when they do. And I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me, and I couldn't find scientific data to back that up. I'm a scientist. Prove it. Show me the graph. I need numbers, right? Anecdotes aren't good enough for me. So that's kind of how I got into this line of work. Like, I want to see for myself on a grand scale with replication whether these things work. Does treatment-free beekeeping, is it even viable? So that's kind of where I came in. I'm very curious, and I gathered data. And it started by Googling, right? I also attend local beekeeping club meetings, and at the one that I go to the most, it's the Lehigh Valley Beekeepers, I noticed there were like these groups, like these cliques, and they would fight with each other, blame each other, right? So the people that wanted to be natural would say that all the problems with bees are because of the commercial people, the conventional people, and the conventional people would totally blame the treatment-free people for their mite bombs. And I was like, whoa, people, like, let's just be tolerant of each other and accept that there's different ways to keep bees and learn from each other, and let's see what's best. And so kind of that's how I came into this. I was like, I'm gonna gather data and learn. Like, I love being part of beekeeping clubs, but I just always feel like a little step back, like I'm kind of an observer of all of the things that are going on. Even on Facebook, like watching all the different threads going everywhere, it's just fascinating to me, the sociology of it, right? So this is like a human thing. This is emotional. We love our bees. Everybody loves their bees. Everyone wants healthy bees. Every single faction wants to have healthy bees. So I try to just keep my mind open and listen and observe. And I also am part of some intro to beekeeping classes. And for somebody just getting into bees that has no idea what they're getting themselves into, or the fact that there's all these different ways to keep bees, it's hard to grasp. So some people in charge of the class started having a discussion about how we can make this visual thing that shows them that there's all these different choices that you're going to have to make for all of these different parts of beekeeping from the beginning. Where, as simple as where are you getting your bees and what equipment are you going to put them in, right? And then comes all the other stuff after that, right? It's very complicated. It's not easy. So we formed sort of a visual that I have totally overhauled over time. So this is my Beekeeping Continuum. So what you can see on here is what I thought were some of the important aspects, and this is freely available online. You can even print it for free. It's like open source. I should have printed you guys each one actually. So this takes a while to explain because people see it and they immediately think they understand it. So it's been my sort of thing to try to get you to break it apart. So this first section is the use of chemicals. There's different reasons you might use chemicals, from varroa mites, small hive beetles, nosema, or anything that requires antibiotics. And within each of these, there's sort of a continuum. Some of them are more like yes, no, but chemicals, never, never anything. Over here to maybe essential oils, organic acids, and then on the far side would be synthetics. So that's your continuum from nothing to artificial chemicals and the things that are in between. Now, the things across the continuum, this low, medium, high, is referring to how much intervention you're making. So for each of these, it's a sort of a different rule about where the things are placed. So to me, for chemicals, they are based on how long are they in the hive, right? So then synthetics are interventive not only because they're created in a lab, which feels the most sort of unnatural in a way, but also they remain, right? They're gonna go into wax and remain there for a very long time. So that's, to me, a huge intervention. Put a chemical in that's gonna last for years. I don't even know how long some of these last forever, right? They're in the wax until the end of time. So that's chemicals. Chemicals make a lot of sense. Then what about hive manipulation? So for varroa mites, there are these cultural controls that you can do, and you might do none of them. You might have a screen bottom board, a purposeful brood break, drone brood removal, or using small cell comb. Now, a lot of people ask me, why is small cell comb way over as the highest bit of intervention? So to me, changing the size of the bee is a really big intervention, right? More so than just allowing the mites to fall through a screen, for example, or removing the drones. So anyway, we have all of this continuum, all of these choices for all of these different things, and this doesn't even include like the whole entire rest of the list of choices that you make when you're a beekeeper. You know, like, should we use plastic foundation or wax? Well, what kind of wax? Is it going to be clean wax? Is it going to be commercial wax that has those synthetics in it already? You know, it's just like extreme. As you know, beekeeping is extremely complicated. I also want to bring to your attention where I got these categories. They fall in line with the questions that are asked on the national survey every April. So, how many of you have done the Bee Informed survey? Awesome. If you haven't, you should, because we need more representation from more natural beekeepers, because you're in the minority, and so we'd love to hear more about what you're doing. It's not me, I'm not doing it. I was able to gather data about what beekeepers are doing across the US by using the Bee Informed survey data, which I had to purchase from them in its raw form so that I could do some analyses. So I just wanted to show you that survey so you can see a little bit about where, I mean, clearly you guys said you've already done it before. But there was a certain number of questions that we got the data for. So, of course, the size of the operation matters. So we used question number 5, which is right here. How many living colonies did you have in October of 2016? So the data that we have is for the 16-17 winter. And so that was able to be used to determine just operation size. So we broke it into 3 categories. If you have less than 50, you are a backyard beekeeper. 50 to 500, you're called a sideliner, and over 500, that would be commercial, right? And then the other core question was, question 80, and everything in between here is all about management. So you guys, when you do this survey, if you do this portion, you're telling me every single thing that you did with your bees the whole entire year. And so that was very useful for me for this study. So what we're getting down to is question 80. I wonder if I can zoom in here. There it is. So question 80. When you're choosing a treatment or a feeding strategy for your colonies, would you say that you are not willing to use any non-bee produced products in the hive? To me, that was a category of beekeeper who's all natural, treatment free. You agree with that? Okay, then we have are only willing to use natural or organic products in the hive. So these people, they're not going to use synthetics or antibiotics. So we would call them organic. They can use essential oils and organic acids. That's okay. They're comfortable with that. And then the last several are, well, while you might prefer natural or organic, you will use synthetics if you have to, or you'll use synthetics if needed, or you have no preference, which to me means you'll use anything if you feel that you need to. So these three we lumped into what we call conventional. So we're just trying to describe beekeepers and what they're doing. It's a very subjective study of just, let's see what beekeepers are doing across the United States. And so again, operation size, backyard, sideline, and commercial, and beekeeping philosophy is what we call your feelings toward using natural products or synthetic products. So then we have conventional, organic, and natural. And so this gave us thousands of bits of information, and my colleague Margarita, who's supposed to arrive around noon today, she's going to talk about feral honeybee colonies. She did these analyses where all of the data got put on these two vectors, and they kind of fell out into groups, which is exactly what we hypothesized, okay? So this first set is based on operation size. So I'm sure you can imagine that if you have 5 beehives in your backyard, you're not going to do the same thing as that commercial guy with 2,000 colonies, right? There's all these factors involved in the decision making. But what you can see on here, each dot is an individual beekeeper and their choices, and then these big squares kind of are the middle of that cluster of that color. And the colors relate to the size of the operation. So what you can see here is that the commercial guys settled out together up here, the backyard settled down here, and then we have sort of the in-between. So the in-between size does in-between management stuff, right? So what we can see is that backyard beekeepers, for example, are not likely to treat with antibiotics or use any treatment for nosema. Many of them don't treat for varroa or small hive beetles. So it seems to me like backyard beekeepers are just generally a little bit more natural in their choices. Whereas when we get to commercial, so these are the big guys, I mean some of these have 50,000, 100,000 colonies, are more likely to use synthetics, Fumidil, and antibiotics. Is this surprising to you? No, it didn't surprise me either, but we need data to show what we've been talking about. So that's what this study was all about, gathering the data and analyzing it. So smaller scale beekeepers are doing different things than large scale beekeepers. So in the next slide, we're going to see 3 graphs just like this. It's the same data, but the color coding is different this time. So now on all 3 of these, we have beekeepers that, on that question 80 that we just went over, fell into the natural category, organic, or conventional. So natural was only natural things going into your colony. Organic, mostly natural, but they would include organic acids and essential oils. Then we have conventional, where they're willing to use anything, including synthetics. And so at the top right, you can see about hive manipulations. And so natural beekeepers are less likely to purposely replace their queen just so that they're young, for example. They may not use those the mothball things when you're storing your equipment, whereas the conventional, which fall at the top, aren't using any IPM stuff, so they're not doing drone brood removal, brood breaks, any of that. They're frequently replacing their queens because they just want to have young queens for winter, for example. They're definitely going to be using standard Langstroth equipment, whereas a natural beekeeper is more likely to use something else, something non-traditional. So that's kind of interesting. Then we have here supplemental feeding. So are you feeding them, for example, high fructose corn syrup or just honey? So again, you can see the natural beekeepers, and I'm sorry, I realize you probably can't read this, way over to the right, much more likely to actually feed honey. I mean, why would a conventional beekeeper do that? They're trying to make money, whereas, which falls over here, is your goal of beekeeping. Natural beekeepers maybe not even taking any honey, not making any money in general, at least the people that filled out this survey. So what this is all just trying to show you is that while it seems to us when we go to bee club meetings that there are different groups of beekeepers doing different things, in reality, they are doing that, right? It doesn't seem that interesting, but we have data now. We have thousands of points of data and statistics, and now scientists can talk about it. It's a real thing. There are natural beekeepers, there are organic beekeepers, and there are commercial beekeepers, conventional. So when we're doing our research, we need to remember that, right? Like, is what I'm doing matching what you're doing, or am I just like a scientist with my lab coat doing what I want, right? I personally am very sensitive to that, and I, like my introduction said, I want to do what's applicable to real beekeepers right now. So I try really hard to talk to people and make sure that what I do matches. So one thing that we're working on developing is some extension materials. So giving pamphlets, for example, to new beekeepers so that they can, they probably come in with a philosophy in mind, but there may not be a mentor that actually matches how they're feeling, or they're just drilled into them, treat, 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 treat. And we want to give them more information and more options for how to manage their bees. So what I call what you do for your bees, and you do, you each have what's called a management system. You have considered the continuum for all of these different things, and you've made choices about what you're going to do in each situation. So here's a totally hypothetical management system. Maybe there's a person who thinks it's important to treat for varroa, but won't use synthetics. So then along this line, they'll fall in the middle, where they're comfortable with essential oils and acids. However, they're not treating for these other things. They're not using antibiotics or putting anything in for small hive beetles. Probably depends on where you are, right? It's not a big deal for me, but if you're in the south, you have to do something. But anyway, for me in Pennsylvania, maybe I'm comfortable with this. Okay. So as far as manipulations, screen bottom board, that's the simplest and most common, I would say, that's used. This beekeeper in their management system will only replace the queen every 2 to 3 years, no more frequently. They use traditional equipment because it's easy to share with their friends when they need a frame of eggs for their, to make a new queen. This person doesn't necessarily want to put the moth crystals in, so they're going to not do anything with their comb before they reuse it after there's a dead out. But they're comfortable with feeding carbohydrates, so sugar syrup, pro-sweet, invert syrup, whatever that they want. They might put a pollen patty on in spring. They harvest some honey, but not all of it. They want the bees to have some left for themselves. Maybe they're really interested in producing honey, but maybe only for their family and friends, and they're going to be pollinating their garden or maybe their neighbor's orchard, and don't expect any income. So this is just a hypothetical one beekeeper's choices across the continuum. So what I don't want anyone to think is that you can only be a natural beekeeper if your lines are straight down the left, right? That's what the first instinct I think people have when they see this. You're conventional if you're way, way over here, and you're natural if you're way, way over here. That's not how it works, right? It's every single choice you make is going to be back and forth and back and forth. But what you could do, if you sat down and circled your choices along there, you're making a list that is your management system. That's what you do for your bees. And you probably don't change much over the years. Unless, of course, you're switching from conventional to a more organic approach. That's when there could be some bigger changes. But in general, you've made your choice about what equipment you're going to use and how you feed and all that stuff. Does this make sense? Okay, so I have come up with what I think are some of these management systems. So I have 4 management systems, and I'm sorry if this is a boring long list. But so here we have, using that same continuum, I would say that you're conventional if you're willing for varroa mites to use synthetics, organics, and essential oils. Certainly if you use synthetics, you're automatically, in my mind, into this category. You don't have to read the whole thing, but I'm sure that you can think of what a conventional beekeeper would do, right? You know, they want to have resistant stock, but I would say that it's more of like a commercial version of that. This is, to me, a very inclusive, like anything goes if you're conventional, right? There's nothing that you can't do. Go ahead and use anything you want, whenever you want. And, of course, this is not what every conventional beekeeper would do. This is just defining what would fall into this segment. Does that make sense? After this, it gets more and more restrictive, right? So anything goes for conventional. If you're going to be organic, you have to eliminate synthetics and antibiotics at least to be considered organic. Now, I'm not talking about USDA certified organic, because do you know why we don't really have that in the US?
Because it's probably hard to get agreement from all the different beekeepers on exactly what, you know, would be required to be organic. And because bees fly all over the place, so they're definitely going to pick up agrochemicals.
Right, it's the land area that is the problem. In 2010, they put out a set of recommendations, and you have to be able to kind of control or know exactly what's happening within a 2-mile radius of your apiary. There could be nothing that's high risk at all. So that's the hard part. That's really hard. Making sure the bees have all the forage, and even if you had that land area, to get them to stay there and not venture any farther. So anyway, to me this is an organic management system because you're not putting any synthetics or antibiotics into your hive. Then I have, whoops, I went the wrong way. What I call a chemical-free management system. So in this case, you're not going to be using any of the chemicals for varroa mite control, but you would be using maybe all of these cultural controls. So you're going to be using resistant stock, small cell comb, drone brood removal, screen bottom board. I thought there were 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm thinking of Ross Conrad's Natural Beekeeping book. He has like this set of 5 things, and none of them are chemicals. They're all just sort of hive manipulations. Brew break, I think, is missing from this list. So you're not putting chemicals into the colony, but you're not doing anything, especially for mites. So this is chemical-free, but not treatment-free. And then I have my definition of treatment-free, but you're going to hear from Solomon how he feels about treatment-free. And this is where you don't use any chemicals, you don't do any of the cultural controls, you rely purely on genetics, right? So it's the sort of live and let die, don't treat, but I'm pretty sure you can feed them so they don't starve, but other than that, they're on their own. So we'll hear from Solomon. But to me, it feels like the most important thing is chemicals, right? So if you want to bring it down into a nutshell, we have conventional, where everything in the whole entire circle is a possibility for your management system, whereas if you're going to have an organic management system, you're limited to only what's inside of the tan circle, and if you're going to be a treatment-free or natural beekeeper, absolutely none. So the point of all of this is just to discuss what beekeepers are doing across the United States, describe and define their methods, right? And so which one is an alternative? They're all different alternatives, but if you think alternative beekeeping is not mainstream, I would say natural would fit into that. I think there's a ton of beekeepers that fall into this organic set that could really market that and aren't, right? Like they don't use synthetics, they don't want them, they don't want to use antibiotics, so they're really falling in organic and they don't even really recognize that about themselves. So I feel like it's important to sort of like make these definitions, and then maybe someone that is falling in that organic section could ask more for their honey, right? And get a little bit better livelihood, and maybe their bees would sell for more if they recognized what they were really doing. So I'm just going to pitch for my other talk that Patricia was talking about, my actual study using bees. This is using people. I am comparing side by side a conventional, an organic, and a treatment-free beekeeping on a very large scale with lots of repetition. And so I'll give you everything that has happened so far, all the results we have so far. It's ongoing, at least for one more year, so things will continue to change, and that's why I don't want to tell her what the results are, because it's like, I don't know yet, we'll see. But I can tell you how they did in their first year, first winter, how they're doing now, and we're doing all kinds of tests and lab tests and testing the health of the bees.